Доброго
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, those who watch us online. We start our work at Ukraine Crisis Media Center. The topic is public sales reform, banks, Ukrzaliznytsia, small enterprise privatization. Our guests are Maksym, Nefyodov, First Deputy Minister of Economic Development and Trade of Ukraine, Yevhen, Kravtsov, Acting Chairman of the Board of Ukrzaliznytsia, Yaroslav, Yurchyshyn, Executive Director, Transparency International Ukraine, Oleksii, Sobolev, Project Manager, ProZorro, Prodigy, Illya, Mykhailov, Deputy Director of Consolidated Asset Sales of DGF. Good afternoon. I will be a moderator. Thank you for watching this press conference. We are going to tell you about the reforms of sales, reforms of public sales. And now I give the floor to Maksym Nefyodov. And then we will give the floor to Yevhen Kravtsov. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you for watching us online. I would like to remind once again that reform of public sales appeared as a separate project of ProZorro procurement system, and we want to build a transparent mechanism of procurement, and then we decided to do the same for the sales of state assets. The state has a lot of assets that are excessive, and this can be done through privatization, and some assets are generated such as metal scrap and used cars, and the state also leaves tons of millions of square meters of area at state and municipal level. Also, the state carry out a lot of contests and auctions that provide the rights for limited resources. That's why it is logical to do it online, to do it through anonymous platforms that were proved efficient, and due to the cooperation with the DGF, we signed a memorandum to create such a system together with the Ministry of Economy, with the Ministry of Transparency International Ukraine, and in November of last year, the system was put into operation, and now it works for more than a year, and it sold assets, the public, communal, and other assets for 6 billion of hryvnias. We set a record, and we have shown that this mechanism can be really efficient, and we grow really rapidly. We sold for more than 6 billion, and in January we sold for more than 1 billion. So this is a sharp increase. This is not linear with the acceleration. And also we went into different systems. We experimented whether we will be able to show some results there, such as lease with the Ukrposhta and the state radio company, and also we move ahead to other segments, including small privatization, and we actively work with the state companies that try to build their corporate governance according to the principles of best examples in private sector. And here, Ukrzaliznytsia can be such a company in the future that can be transformed from obsolete Soviet giant into the company that is profitable, that is really a driver of Ukrainian economy. So, Yevgeny, the floor is given to you. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. I would like to tell you about the situation connected with the asset management in Ukrzaliznytsia and the cooperation we started with ProZorro sales. Ukrzaliznytsia enterprise is one of the biggest owner of movable and immovable assets, both in private and public sector, and we are one of the biggest companies, and we have a lot of assets, and in the process of corporatization during 3 last years, we didn't carry out the operations, we only continued the lease. This was connected with the procedure of the asset management rules. Now these rules are established, and it is said that we can carry out all the operations concerning sales and the lease and other operations. We can do it only through electronic systems, and this is a ProZorro sales system. And also we have a lot of assets we are planning to sell or to lease. And for example, if we are speaking about rolling stock, we have about 10,000 freight cars that you know that when this was done non-transparently, and now this should be done transparently through electronic systems and to carry out the appropriate procedures. And after this, we will sell them on the auction.
We believe that this year and next year we will we'll gain about 2 billion hryvnias from the sales of those assets. It's a significant amount of money. And so with the need in the rolling stock and the other requirements that our company now faces, that will be a great help. Additionally, we also have a vast area, or rather vast areas, in total it's a vast area for lease of our different premises, like railway stations and so on. After we've witnessed that after Ukrzaliznytsia joined the ProZorro system, they also increased their revenues generated by the lease of their premises, various premises. And if we historically were getting 100 to 160 million a year from the rent, we are going to increase that amount. We are also one of the largest producers, or rather not producers certainly, but the traders in scrap metal. Last year, for example, the sales amounted to 2 billion. So we are going to use this ProZorro trading system for the increase of our trade operations. We are going to sell also the lubricants, for example, and as we are all well aware of the lack of transparency in many Ukrainian markets, we hope that our use of this ProZorro system will also encourage the other companies to use a ProZorro system, thus making the commercial and trading operations more transparent. Please show the next slide. Here we have the use of the or rather the transportation, the amount of goods transported by Ukrzaliznytsia facilities, various rolling stock and carriages of different types. And for example, the cost of Ukrzaliznytsia's operations was 83. We charged only 83 hryvnias per ton last year, while the market rate was more than in excess of 700 hryvnias. So you can see the difference. So we again view this ProZorro platform as very useful in enabling us to gather the bidding claims from different bidders who would like to participate. And so we will be able, using this system, this platform, also to see the demand on the market for the transportation services, railroad transportation. And without exaggeration, I must say that this is going to be a revolution, because until now we haven't had any systems capable of assessing even roughly what is the demand for the transportation, railroad transportation in Ukraine, especially cargo services. We hope that as a result of these innovations, I'd say we are going to get another at least 4 billion hryvnias, and probably more. Some evaluations are up to 10, which is going to cover, this amount is going to cover the probably, if we reach that maximal amount, it would cover half of our needs in capital investment. Because for the last year, for example, it was about 26 billion hryvnias. So if we reach 10 billion, it's almost a half that we'll be that we are able to cover with our own funds. So these auction sales, then the leasing and the rent of our assets, and this more active use of ProZorro system with its abilities to improve the efficiency of our operations. Well, thank you. I think it's very interesting information because it was Ukrzaliznytsia who was the first to organize an auction for diesel fuel. It was the only large state entity that acquired a lot of diesel through a bidding procedure. So I want to emphasize that this is a good example of a reform, or rather reforms in a big company. Because usually when we speak about large state-run entities, they can hardly exemplify, in our understanding, in our view, due to our experience, any efficiency or cost effectiveness and things like that. So here we have a good example of how the good results can be achieved, how efficiency can be improved, like for example the capital investment being covered increasingly by the company's own assets and funds. It's very positive, and if we apply that experience throughout all of our country, it's going to generate the growth of GDP and things like that. So it's both qualitative and quantitative improvement that we can see in Ukrzaliznytsia, and I believe that this pilot project that was mentioned in the sales, auction sales, I hope it's revolutionary for Ukraine. Ukraine has never had yet this large-scale experience of successful auction bids of that scale. Especially if we take into account the very special features of the railroad transportation. Like, for example, one company needs one carriage for each cargo, the other one needs at the same time maybe 100, and in different regions of the country, how to coordinate all that. I'm sure that these innovations that our colleague mentioned, they certainly can produce a large amount of, very efficient and qualitatively improved and cost-effective operations. And I say I can be proud of our company having companies having these examples. Well, getting back to the other things that are of interest to us now. For example, it's the 7076 bill that is yet a bill. It's not yet signed by the president. It's going also to improve the regulation of this auctioning business. Because certainly after that law is this bill is enacted, we will have to adopt another package probably of different other regulations and instructions and all the needed documents. If we in total we came to the conclusion that in total we are going to need at least 35 documents, legal documents of various levels, and 3 of them are going to be the laws, the acts themselves. And after that, but after they are adopted and enacted, we can spread this auctioning procedure all over the country and all across the Ukrainian economy. I would now like to draw your attention to the fact that Ukrzaliznytsya's example is a good example in terms of struggle against corruption, which is one of the priorities nowadays. For example, if we take the issue of the rent of their premises, we know that railway stations all around Ukraine, they have rather large buildings, fairly large buildings, which at best are now being rented to some cafeteria, low quality, food and beverage, establishments. And there are more examples of successful, there are going to be more examples, I'm certain of that, of successful, more efficient and more cost-effective leasing and renting of the assets of Ukrzaliznytsia. ProZorro Prodigy system, so ProZorro sales system was closely related to the fund of guaranteeing the deposit guarantee fund that was supposed to protect the individual deposits of Ukrainian citizens, and this fund can now get, as it is depleted, it can get hopefully more funds from these, derived from these procedures, or generated as a result of these auctioning procedures and bidding procedures. We also, at the end of last year, offered another model. We called it the Dutch model of auctioning, but as of now, predominantly in Ukraine, the so-called English model of bidding is used. If we see, for example, that an asset that is auctioned is not very popular, it is not bought, then we can trade it by reducing its price and trade it or try to sell it until it sells actually. But these are various techniques of which my colleague Illya can tell you much more. Thank you, Maksym, and thank you all those present. I can share with you a retrospective story when it started in May 2016, when our fund initiated this internal transformation, and we decided to adopt this new model of transparent auctions. We, by the way, did that in conjunction in joining our efforts with Transparency International and also a number of Ukrainian government entities, ministries and agencies. And during that time, as Maksym has already mentioned, we have achieved some very impressive, I would say, results. We have already introduced a number of improvements. We have eliminated a number of inefficient components of this auctioning system, and this fund of this Kiev School of Economics and Trade, the system was initiated jointly by this school and some other agencies, as I mentioned. It was practically put into practical use only a month and a half ago. The very system of electronic trade is a result of these reforms that are now spreading to the other sectors of Ukrainian economy, like, for example, Ukrzaliznytsia, so the railroad transport branch of Ukrainian or sector of Ukrainian economy. So let me thank again all those who have participated in establishing and developing this system, and I'm more than certain that in the future we'll have more records to set, and we'll have more achievements. The floor now is yours, Oleksii. Yeah, I would only like to add that the National Bank of Ukraine has helped a great deal, and we also were able, with the use of the National Bank of Ukraine, to sell some of the assets that were in public property. And as we can see, ultimately we reached the results that were 10 times that of the, almost 10 times that of the initial figures. So ProZorro is also a child, we can say, of very active public participation, non-governmental organizations' participation, and of the public at large. Mr. Yurchyshyn is going to continue now. Thank you. Well, it certainly has been logical for us that this system of ProZorro, which is so positively evaluated now by all the agents and players, so to say, in this trading, auction trading field. We now have, I must tell you that we now have visitors from different countries, from Ghana, from Angola, from the European countries, who are visiting our country to study the practices, how the system is used, and I'd say that this ProZorro system is that indeed, if we have this cooperation between the public sector and the government, only under that condition, the establishment of such a system can be a success. What did we start with? Or from, I would say, what was the initial stage? What was before what had there been before we started this ProZorro system. It was a rather closed and very corrupt environment in which some people were selling the assets which they wanted to sell to the people to whom they wanted to sell those assets. Now we have more active participation of the banks, from which we generated around 4 billion hryvnias, and millions have been generated from different stuff that basically was already junk, not needed by anybody, and it also brought about the increase of the public budget of Ukraine, and I believe that everyone already feels that budget growth, and hopefully we will be able to feel it even more in the future. When for example, even if the leasing contracts are traded transparently, it reduces corruption among local authorities, and needless to say that it generates revenues to the participating companies themselves. So I would like now to not only thank those who took part in all that process, but I would also say that we already enjoy the moment of acknowledgement and appreciation, I would even say. Speaking about the bad assets of a number of Ukrainian banks that needed to be dealt with, and we remember only too well that very recently, when this topic started to be discussed, it was considered a taboo. But with the help of the then governor of the National Bank of Ukraine, Ms. Gontareva, because you remember that she received some negative coverage in the press, but it was only because of her granting us this permission, you know, to sanitize, for the sanation, as we call it, of the banking system. Without that permission, without her goodwill, so to say, Ukrainian banking system would have remained, you know, unhealthy and very with a lot of slack and inefficient. So we started with trying to convince businesses and businessmen to take part in these auctions, that they would indeed receive and obtain the results of these biddings. And now we can see that yes, it was in truth so. There were real auctions and real returns earned on these during these sales, or as a result of these sales, and the rates and the interest rates, for example, for the assets that had initially been leased. So these prices even you know, overtook, so to say, any earnings that could have been obtained from these interest rates. So a lot of people have become very satisfied with the outcomes of the functioning of ProZorro system. So let me use a metaphor and say that this virus of ProZorro system is spreading all across Ukraine, and we are making this process of auctioning of public assets more healthy, so to say. And it spreads to different areas and different sectors of Ukrainian economy, for example, the health reform and the other reforms in other areas of our economy. And as we deem ProZorro to be used mostly for small assets privatization. But we hope that after these laws that Maksym has already mentioned, after they are enacted, we will be able also to use that practice for even the significant increase of the national budget revenue. Let me also tell you that we are now being told that the International Monetary Fund insists on Ukraine's, bringing the gas tariffs, the cost of or the price of the natural gas sold to the public and to the companies to the real market value. I'm sure that it's not that pressing, and if we debate that with the IMF, we will be able to postpone this increase in pricing of the natural gas. And I'm sure that if we continue along this path of the reforms, we will have more, trump cards, so to say, in our sleeves that we could use in our dealings with the IMF. And ProZorro is a step in the right direction. I would like to thank again all those people who, many of them spent their nights, working. Then I would like to thank them for this establishment of the ProZorro system, and let me conclude with that remark. The floor now is yours. Yeah, I would like again to emphasize the role of the fund of the guarantees of the assets of individual deposits. Let me remind you that all this small privatization in the townships is going to be channeled through this ProZorro system. There are already 20 towns in Ukraine that already use this platform, and we view our task as teaching all the others, all the other local authorities and governments to work with to use this system. And usually, as you have already heard, the bidding price increases at least twice, at least twofold, when we use this ProZorro system in the course of bidding, in the course of auctioning. And as we have already heard from this Ukrzaliznytsia example, how successfully they used ProZorro for auctioning their assets, I think it's very cool. It's I like it. I liked it very much. It was for the first time when the individual deposits guarantees fund has already sold a number of the assets of a number of banks, and in my view, it's about there are about 90 of such banks. So we need to do our best in order to complete this reform, and I would like to thank the National Bank of Ukraine and the other entities, the other agencies of the government of Ukraine and the Transparency International organization for their participation, for their support and even aid. Without them, that would have never happened. Let me also thank the government of Canada, the government of Germany, and the Ukrainian School of Economics that has been helping us with fundamental research. Thank you. Any questions? Interfax Ukraine, I have a question to Maksym and what about the monopolism of your company? If there was a decision regarding this confiscated, those confiscated assets, this Setam company, if there is a decision, governmental decision, why hasn't it been published? Well, we are all in favor of making this information public. We do not support this, monopolistic approach when there is only one platform for this auction procedures. But it's difficult for me to comment now because there is a lot of technical problems, like, for example, how to store, where to store these confiscated assets. It's not about someone being better, more efficient, and the other ones being worse. It's subjective. Different people have different views on this. It's just competition among us and the other companies who potentially, a business is good today, it's bad tomorrow. So when we speak about this ability or this access to the auctioning procedures, the broader it is, the better. And we hope that we'll be able to move in the right direction. But on the other hand, let me ask you not to make any scandal, any investigative journalism of that fact that you have mentioned. As you have heard from Ukrzaliznytsia, it took 3 years for them, from them to, to settle this mechanism of participation in the bidding procedures. So, as you can understand and as you can hear today, all our procedures in all our entities of our government, they go with difficulties, and we, especially when it comes to selling public assets, it's very difficult, and with no regard towards the technical difficulties and the other difficulties, especially because these assets, they are not somewhere, these are not raw materials somewhere deep underground. These are the assets that we can all put our hands on. Like, for example, it's a car. We have a car. We can see a car that we can sell now as a car, but 3 years later, we are not even able to sell it as a scrap metal. So you see how can it all is done in Ukraine, and the result might be sometimes zero, as you can understand. I would like to add, in my view, these discussions that are now underway about how to organize, better organize the sales of public assets, we indeed have a lot of difficulties with making best decisions, and when it comes to this Setam company that manages this those confiscated assets, I am of the opinion that this management should be, including the storage of these assets, confiscated assets. They should be under one roof, so to say, like Setam, under the management of Setam company. Therefore, I think that this, so to say, this notion of complexity of the services, and therefore there can only be one system, one platform for these services, I think it would be soon removed. And this is not, the mismanagement of these assets is not something like treason or something. It's competition, and it all makes us working more efficiently. If you don't have any more questions, colleagues, then we can round up our discussion and conclude it herewith.